Greetings, and welcome to the second part of my favorite games that I got to play at IndieCade. Got a lot more great games to share with you, so let's start with my favorite from the Nintendo and Sony booths. 1001 Spikes. It's a retro-style massacre game, kind of in the style of Indiana Jones. The game is essentially an updated version of the Xbox indie game Abon Hawkins and the 1000 Spikes. The game's name is a reference to how many lives you get playing it. 1001 lives, and if you run out, you have to go all the way back from the beginning. It's the kind of game that you can imagine the developers giggling with glee every time the game tricks you into dying. Hidden spikes, hidden traps, it's definitely the kind of thing that requires a bit of memorization going through. It has a charming and diverse retro-style look to it with some nice control, but what really sets it apart is its multiplayer. Imagine this completely co-op with 4 players at once. If one player makes it, then they can all go forward. It's amazingly fun to see the other people being used as guinea pigs to make sure you go through. The game has been confirmed to be released on the PlayStation 4, PlayStation Vita, the 3DS, and the Wii U. It's also been announced that the game will be released on Steam for the PC, Mac, and Linux. Thanks, Twitter! It's going to have plenty there for single players to get through, but honestly, I'd recommend a home console so you can play it with some buddies. The game will be released sometime before Christmas, definitely one to look out for. Next up, Porpentine's Twine Compilation. Twine is an interesting and exciting movement in gaming today, and Porpentine is one of the strongest developers using it. For those who don't know, Twine is a game creation tool focused on hypertext. It's very much like an interactive novel where the player can click on different branches of a story, a bit like a choose-your-own-adventure book, but that description really doesn't do it justice. People have created a variety of different things using it, like poems, text adventures, and even strategy games. I feel like Twine is one of the very last and best places for the player's imagination to be a big part of the experience. Porpentine is a great example of that, as a lot of her work has a great amount of depth to it and certainly delves into the surreal. It's interesting how she's able to pull a lot of depth and meaning out of simple effects like making letters blur on a certain line, where the words are placed, how the words are placed, or if they're even words at all. I should also say that a lot of these games are very adult, some featuring sexual content and violent content. One of the differences here is that it's handled completely maturely. And that to me is part of what's so refreshing about her work. It's adult content that actually feels adult. These games are very difficult to discuss without spoiling, but as a good starting point, a few I'd recommend to check out first are Howling Dogs, Parasite, Cyber Queen, Crystal Warrior Kesha, and my personal favorite, The Sky in the Room. All of them are available to play on her website for free for your favorite browser. Next up, Rollers of the Realm. It's a pinball game with RPG elements. Inspired by the NES game Pinball Quest, instead of just aiming for bumpers or tunnels for a higher score, you actually aim at enemies attacking you. Each ball is actually a different character with different abilities, such as the main character being able to get an extra ball, being her dog, and the knight being a bit heavier can break through objects more easily. It's also surprisingly very story-driven, as each of the characters have their own backstory and their own personalities.
If we run into trouble, stand clear and enjoy the show.
It's also not just a combat pinball game, as there are a lot of puzzles to solve in between each of the fights. It's the kind of pinball game that isn't as unforgiving as, well, most pinball games, and the ball physics feel terrific. It's a game with a serious amount of depth to it, with different items that you can get to upgrade the different balls, and the different personalities, and the puzzle aspects, and the story aspect. This is definitely one of the games at IndieCade I had to pry myself away from, and otherwise I would have been playing it throughout the entire festival. They're considering other platforms, but for the moment it's going to be released on the PC through Steam. There's no release date just yet for Rollers of the Realm, but I got a feeling that it's going to be one of the big highlights of the year. Next up, Sokobond. Sokobond is a minimalist circle-pushing game with a love for science. The circles are actually elements on the periodic table, and you form them all together to make a molecule. For example, this one right here, CH4, being methane. Puzzle solving is, in a way, feeling smarter about yourself, and this kinda takes it a step further. The reward for solving each of the puzzles is hearing what the molecule you just made is. The soothing soundtrack comes from Ryan Roth, whom you might know from other projects like Electronic Superjoy or Starseed Pilgrim, another finalist from IndieCade. It's a wonderfully zen soundtrack, which is appropriate because this game is freaking difficult. It has an appropriate difficulty curve to it, but some of the later puzzles really left me stumped. If you're up for a completely fair challenge that'll keep you hooked for a long time and learn some science while you're at it, Sokoban is available for the Mac, PC, and Linux and is coming soon to Steam. It's a cliche to say, but do it for science. Up next, Spaceteam. Spaceteam is a mobile multiplayer game with a really neat concept. Each player has a control panel with a list of ridiculous commands made for a spaceship. What you do in each level is that you have a command that you have to tell the other players, and the other players can't see your screen. You have to communicate your commands like on a Starship Enterprise, and if you don't, then your ship crashes. Each player has to communicate their commands, and if they do, they all get through and you go on with the game. It is a ridiculously fun party game. It's all about communication and finding the right rhythm between you and your group, and it's made all the more challenging with some of the ridiculous funny names that you have to say.
Engage digital volt bit.
Nice, very well.
Oh, that's me.
But one of the coolest things about the game is that it's a free app. And if somebody has an Android and you have an iPhone, you can even play together via Wi-Fi, so that's rad. The game is available for Android Google Play, as well as the Apple and Amazon App Store. If you got a couple buddies and are looking for a fun, ridiculous time, definitely a highly recommended app. Up next, Super Time Force. Super Time Force is an action platformer with a really interesting concept. It's a single-player co-op game with time reverse mechanics. You can rewind time at any time and be able to select different characters. You have to go through the stage in a certain amount of time, and say if one of your character dies, you can rewind time, go back a little bit farther, and use a different character. This new character can then go forward and use some of his or her special abilities to be able to help you out to get through the obstacle that you're trying to get through, be it an enemy or a barrage of enemies. The people that helped you get through can then revive your fallen characters so you can use them again in order to get through the stage. Yeah, this is starting to sound a little bit complicated, and it's certainly one of those games that you kind of have to wrap your head around to understand the concept. It's a pretty challenging game where you really have to determine and really think strategically as you're going through the level. You'll find yourself reversing time quite a bit as you try to figure out what you're supposed to do in a certain place or a certain obstacle. Your troops have various different abilities, like some have a rocket launcher, others have a rapid fire gun, and others can block projectiles to be able to hit the enemies in front of them. It's a really rewarding and unique game with a high level of polish in its audio and visual design. The game is set to be released on the 360 through Xbox Live Arcade, and it was recently announced that it will be making its way to Xbox One. There's no release date for it just yet, but it's definitely one to look out for. Moving on, That Dragon Cancer. A personal game about raising a son with terminal cancer. It's a retelling of developer Ryan Green and his wife Amy Green's story of raising Joel, a 4-year-old child fighting 3 years of having terminal cancer. This is the most emotionally devastating game I've ever played. I was in tears and I literally had to give Ryan a hug after I had experienced it. That Dragon Cancer is actually really difficult to discuss why it works as a game without showing off and spoiling the entire game. There's also been a bit of debate on whether or not a game is the right platform to be able to tell the story of Joel, why it wouldn't work as a movie or a book, for example. Well, of course the story can work as a film, and it has been made into a book, but how Ryan uses interactivity in the game really drives home what he and his family went through. Gaming has proven multiple times that it can handle serious subjects in a very universal way. Gaming has the power to make something deep and meaningful, and That Dragon Cancer is an excellent example of that. The game is set to be released in 2014, exclusive to the Ouya for 6 months, and later to the PC. This is my most anticipated game of 2014, and I can't wait to experience it. So, of the hundreds of games that were shown off at IndieCade and everything I got to try, you may ask yourselves if I had a favorite. Well, I do. There are games there that question what a game could be and the different lengths that it could show. There are games with great stories to tell with new and interesting ways to tell them. There are games there that pushed the medium forward and maybe in a small way pushed humanity forward. There was one game there that had all these elements that really stood out amongst the crowd. My favorite game of IndieCade 2013 is Blendo Games' Quadrilateral Cowboy. You may know Blendo Games and the lead developer Brendan Chung from titles like Gravity Bone or last year's 30 Flights of Lovin'. This is a sequel to both those games and part of his Citizen Able series. Quadrilateral Cowboy won the grand prize at IndieCade and it's very well deserved. You play as a hacker that goes into different buildings with a trusty hacking deck that hooks up to an electrical outlet so you can code, yes, quite literally code, into the system to open doors, vaults, and other kinds of electronics. You're a hired spy going into these different buildings to obtain information only to the highest bidder. Brendan Chung has a reputation of being a very playful developer. His games having a style and design of having fun with the idea of gaming being a new, exciting artistic medium, and that's on full display here. The game's just dripping with a fun and quirky style to it, like the beginning having an interface like an old Macintosh computer. It constructs a portable record player right at the beginning so you can listen to music right before a train heist. How the game even has a blinking button. No reason for it, other than it's just fun to have and fun to mess around with. That's a lot of the fun of the game, is that you get to see Brendan Chung's superior wit as a games developer. One of the neatest aspects is the hacking deck itself, and yes, you learn actual code as you're going through the game. The game does a really good job of walking you through it for those of us who aren't programmers and think that Visual Basic is rocket science, and once you get the hang of it, it's really rewarding and really neat. And in case you're wondering, this is going to be a pretty lengthy game in comparison to 30 Flights of Lovin'. 30 Flights was a little bit more story-oriented, and the impression that I'm getting from Quadrilateral Cowboy is that it's much more gameplay-oriented. Of all the games that I got to play at IndieCade West 2013, Quadrilateral Cowboy was a standout in interesting gameplay, creative and unique presentation in audio design, game design, and overall enjoyment. It's a tremendous growth for Chung as a games developer, and it's clear that he's putting a lot of love and attention into this game. According to the website, it's expected to be released in 2013, but there hasn't been a release date as of yet, or if it'll be on the Mac or Linux in the future. Blendo Games has got something really wonderful on its hands, and I can't wait to play it. So there you go, my favorite games that I played at IndieCade. There's a lot of great titles there that I haven't talked about that are available to view right on their website. A huge thanks to every developer that showed off their game to me. A huge thanks to the amazing staff at IndieCade for putting this all together. An enormous thanks to David Savage for joining me in the event and filming some of the footage that you found here. And thank you for watching. Hopefully, I'll see you next year.